What tastes better than it smells? Welcome to Sensual by Design. I'm Angel, and this episode of the podcast formerly known as the Authentic Action Podcast is the first of a new era for me and for you. And we're calling it Sensual by Design because we're going to be diving deep into all the senses. I like to call myself a multi-sensory storyteller, and I've been selling sensuality supplies for more than half my life, and I'm finally deciding to embrace it in a new way, clicking all these pieces together. I'm pretty excited about it. So today I want to talk to you about our sense of smell. And did you know that your sense of smell has more impact on your emotions than any of your other senses? I'm currently writing a book, nearly done, called The Shift: Own Your Emotions, Own Your Life. And in that book, I'm really trying to get at the basic tools that we all can use to feel our feelings more and keep ourselves regulated so that we're both not spilling over that threshold of overwhelm and not getting caught under that threshold of suppression where we're just numbing out the threshold of numbness. So I find it a fantastic coincidence or not coincidence that I deal in aromatherapy, essential oils, natural perfumes like these little guys here, um, and hard to find fragrances of all sorts. And in my research about emotions, ran back into some of the more current research about fragrances and our sense of smell. So I want to dive into that. I'm going to put a little of this neroli, which is orange blossom, and some of this neroli vanilla, which is orange blossom mixed with vanilla, which, by the way, is a product that you can find on Etsy in my Sleeping Dragons company store. Soon to have its own website again, but in the meantime, direct from me to you, you can order these sensuality supplies and many, many more in my Etsy store. So check it out. Emotions are such an important part of our life, such an important part of being human. And in my lifelong journey of entrepreneurship and studying other entrepreneurs, I frequently run into people giving advice against being emotional. And I've come to understand that what most people mean when they talk about being too emotional is, or being emotional at all, is being too emotional, or rather being dysregulated. So not just being emotional, but letting the emotions steer the whole this whole meat suit, right? Because to me, our emotions, our feelings are not facts, as a friend of mine likes to say. They are data, though. So the way we interpret that data is often in the form of shit, what I call shit stories. So we often misinterpret that data and tell ourselves old stories, or maybe we just have a very narrow bandwidth of storytelling capacity about that data coming in. So we might boil it all down, for example, to happy, sad, and mad. That's a frequent little popular framework for many humans. But actually, there are many, many, many more beautiful nuances to our feelings. And there's a correlation in my mind between our emotions and our feelings, which I call emotions the neurochemical, electrochemical data coming in all the time, and our feelings is what I call it when we become aware of that data and we tell a story about it, often a wrong story, or a story that's not very helpful. Um, In a similar way, we have all where the human knows the human is able actually able to recognize estimates are over 10,000 different smells. I have several interesting fun facts related to all this that are piling up in my brain, but let me get through this one first, which is that we have the capacity to smell a lot more nuance than you might think. A lot of people, I think, don't think. I think don't think. Yeah, that was what was that? Not a double negative, but anyway, a lot of us probably don't think about all those 10,000 different smells that we're able to pick out and distinguish. But it's pretty remarkable. We like to think about, we say our canine friends, dogs, have a great acute sense of smell, and we think of other animals as having an acute sense of smell. But humans have a very acute sense of smell, and we are able to smell. I was just reading about petrichor, which is a name we fairly recently made up to describe the fragrance of rain on dry soil here in the desert. It's well, not common, but when it rains, it's almost always there. And turns out some studies show that we are able to, the human nose is able to smell petrichor, which is apparently like an oily substance that results from the bacteria and microbes and chemicals in the soil when the rain hits it. We can detect something like zero point 0.4 particles per trillion or some. I don't know if that number is right, but it is up there in that range. It is an amazingly small amount of particle in a big field that the human nose can detect. There's theories that that's because other animals apparently do use that like camels use that to tell when there's water. Maybe we humans have some remnants of that. We don't really know, but it has been shown that we have this fantastic sense of smell. And one of the fun facts that I wanted to mention is that there's some very fascinating research that shows that fetuses can smell or be influenced by what their mothers are smelling while they're in the womb. So I hesitated earlier about the nose because even though there are olfactory nerves, the olfactory nerve, I think it's just one, but there are olfactory bulbs full of receptors that are responsible for then the neurochemical, the changes that happen in our brain and then in our bodies in response to smells. And those um, are also triggered by our sense of taste. And when we're in the womb, we can have some of those triggers. I believe it's through that sense of taste into that olfactory bulb in the brain. And why I mean, this is fascinating on so many levels, but one of the most fascinating parts to me is that those olfactory bulbs, as they're called, are actually in the limbic or right next to the limbic system of the brain, depending on how you look at it, part of the limbic or attached to the limbic system. And the limbic system is where we house our emotions. That's where the amygdala is, which is responsible, it's thought to be responsible for the bulk of our emotions, and where the hippocampus is, which is where we do our associative learning, where we house our memory to a large extent. All this, I should say, with a pinky finger asterisk, we're still learning about. I am certainly no expert. I'm just regurgitating to the best of my capacity what I've learned in my own studies and that I find fascinating. That said, there is quite a lot of fascinating research just in the last like 25 years in the time that I've been studying this stuff that has come along to really um, give legitimacy to aromatherapy, for example. It's been shown through, I think it's EKGs or various scientific, measurements where they're able to show that smelling things affects our memory, it affects our blood pressure, it can affect our heart rate, it can affect um, our skin temperature, and when we smell those chemicals that are in an aroma, in a fragrance, that are in the air, they're highly evaporative chemicals that get into the air in aroma rings, and that's when you smell a fragrance that's in the air. That's what's happening, is that particle is getting into your brain, and it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So it's one of the most direct routes that we have to trigger memory and to help trigger the remembering of a memory, like solidify memory attached to fragrance, and also to affect our mood. Good marketers know this very well, and you may or may not be surprised to know that the sense of brand marketing in their sense, like they don't only work on their logo, the visual scent, the visual aspects of their logo. They also, most very successful companies also work on a fragrance aspect of the logo, and it's not spelled out. It may not be as obvious, but if you've ever shopped at Aber Abercrombie and Finch, I just realized I can't say that word. I can read it perfectly well. There's many words like that. Anyway, there are lots of brands that you would know there's a particular smell for. Most department stores have their own brand and many particular products. Play-Doh was one of the first very popular ones that has a very particular smell that anybody who uses that product will know the smell of. And there might be other products in the same, in a similar vein, but they will not have that distinct patented smell. And those are part of that's patented because it's part of the logo, part of the marketing process. And that is due to the fact that there's a lot of science behind how different fragrances affect all those biological processes. Now, there's those biological processes, and there are some universals, like, for example, vanilla in one study was found to have a calming effect on like 65% of per participants. But there's also a non-universal aspect, which has to do with that associative memory part or aspect of how smell registers in our brain. And if it makes sense, if you think about how we all have different experiences and different memory, one of my favorite examples that I just came across was a study that was done with a bunch of different scents, and a survey with a bunch of different people in the UK and in America. And one of the scents was wintergreen, and one of the pieces of data that stood out that gets remarked on was that wintergreen was on average marked as an unpleasant smell by people in the UK, and on average marked as a pleasant smell by people in America. And then with a little deeper digging, it was found that that's probably because in the UK, people associate wintergreen with medicinal things, and including World War II, which is relatively recent there with that smell. And in America, we associate wintergreen with gum and candy. And so it has a more positive association. So you can see that just demonstrates how many smells aren't really good or bad, probably the bulk of them. We could get into the nuances of the different chemicals and how they do. Some do disrupt our hormones, some do, maybe mask bad smells that should warn us of something dangerous, for example. There's all kinds of nuances to that. But just to speak broadly, because of that associative memory piece, that's the reason the perfume industry and fragrance industry is so booming all these centuries is because it's not just one thing that we can all agree smells the best all the time. There are many, many, many things, thousands of different smells. And then when we start combining them, it gets pretty amazing to think about. And even if we're not aware of our reaction to smelling things, we are reacting to them often subconsciously. Um, what I call the elephant in my book, The Shift, I am trying to use a lot of storytelling, or I am using a lot of storytelling. And one of the frameworks I'm using is this idea of the elephant, which is our subconscious and our superconscious, our genetics that we're pretty much unaware of, and yet is also really steering the whole program. And then our ant, which is like our little subconscious, which is often misdirected or going in the opposite direction of the bigger elephant of our more broad picture. And so my book, The Shift, is really about how can we become more self-aware, get more in touch with our elephant from our conscious ant selves, and learn to set our goals that are in alignment with both of those things so that we're making more rapid gains, and also how to feel our feelings more, own our feelings more. So I like to think about like a bandwidth and how we have this narrow capacity a lot of times for feeling, and we might spill over the top into that threshold of overwhelm, and we might slip under the bottom into that threshold of numbness or just coping. But as we learn to name our, first of all, take ownership of our feelings, that expands that bandwidth. And as we learn to name our feelings, like instead of just mad and sad and happy, we could be excited, and we could be um, trepidatious, and we could be exuberant, and we start to learn more and more ways of naming our emotions and getting in touch with them instead of being afraid of them and running away and just suppressing them. They stop having control over us, and we start to have more control over them and be able to use them to find meaning in our lives, to have more dynamic and meaningful conversations and interactions and experiences together. And then as we continue to expand that bandwidth, and we learn to take control of our own energy by, again, still being responsible for our own energy, but practicing these practices like breath work and meditation and sound healing and all the things that you've probably heard of, and perhaps you're already practicing and know the value of, or perhaps you've just thought, I'm not going to try it because it doesn't work, or I tried it once and it didn't work. But the thing is, like just like going to the gym doesn't work just by going one time. Emotional fitness isn't something you do one time. It's a lifelong journey, and it's about that level of fitness, that level of resilience. My arms got tired speaking of fitness, holding up my bandwidth. But the point that I was trying to make with this is that if you get your bandwidth expanded more, then you can have a wider range of more fulfilling experiences, more feeling, without spilling over that threshold of overwhelm, learning to recognize when you're approaching it and saying, like, oh, hey, I need to respect my own body's boundaries. I need to take a little break. I need to back off a little bit. I need to pause. I need to breathe. I need to utilize one of these tools that I know can help me bring myself back away from that threshold of overwhelm. Or conversely, instead of just constantly plummeting down to the bottom end where we're having to shut down, or we can barely cope, or we're just coping instead of really living and sort of bobbing around down here, we can learn as we feel ourselves approaching that to again set healthy boundaries and use the tools that we can learn to use to take better care of ourselves. So, one of those tools that I think is underappreciated and perhaps not underutilized, I just think maybe it's utilized in an unconscious way, and that by bringing it more to our conscious awareness, which, aromatherapists, many people have been consciously aware and are probably yelling at me right now through the screen, perhaps, but many of us aren't. And I've studied aromatherapy for at least more than 2 decades now, going on 3, but I still find a lot of this fascinating and sometimes surprising, and didn't really realize how directly connected our olfactory bulbs are to our emotional limbic amygdala, like physically connected in the brain, so that um, it just makes such sense that that is one of the most direct ways that we can influence our own mood, our own wellness. And of course, the other senses, what things look like, definitely are important. Sound is one of my favorite methods, and I like sound because you can create vibration, all kinds of different vibration in the body that actually vibrates your vagus nerve, which runs from inside your brain through here by your voice box, through your heart, your digestive system, into your reproductive system. The longest nerve in the body, they call it the wandering nerve, and it really connects all these vital functions of the body and helps regulate our central nervous system. And sound in the body, sound is something that we can create ourselves in our body. And sound, when you add like rhythm, which gets into our heartbeat, and just our whole lives are full of different rhythms. So um that's a tangent to to the olfactory facet that I want to get into today, but just to acknowledge that all our senses are very important when it comes to influencing our emotion, regulating our emotion, and they are all windows or like tools or avenues that we can use to help our control our own emotions, get more in touch with our emotions, express our emotions in healthier ways, all of that. And I did not know until very recently, as I was doing research for this project, that our olfactory sense, in some studies at least, showed like a 35% influence compared to, I think it was between a 4 and a 7%, much, much lower. And I'm not sure the exact details of what they were measuring and how, but point that they were trying to get across in this particular study is that our sense of smell is even more influential. It's a very strong influence over our mood, our feeling and our memory of feeling, which those two are so closely related. And I'm sure you've had the experience of having a thought, maybe the thought sparks a feeling, and then that feeling sparks more thoughts. It's like the law of attraction brings more and more thoughts that match that feeling, and you can rev yourself, called the pit of despair, or the spiral of doom. I'm quite good at it myself, if I do say so myself. Um, and yes, I'm just being silly, but nonetheless, it is true that just like any addictive pattern, we can develop addictive patterns or maybe even chemical dependencies. There's some research exploring that on certain reactions to certain thought patterns. I personally have really struggled for more than a decade now to shift some negative thought patterns that I discovered I was just unconsciously repeating in my own brain and abusing myself with. And I'm not sure when it started. I think it might have been with me since very, very early on, if not my whole life. But wasn't until like my 40s that I became aware of it in a new way, where I suddenly realized that I was abusing myself, and that whatever other circumstances might be sucking in my life, the very most profound, most impactful part of that has been and still is my own self-defeating stories, my own thoughts. And so as I've he continued to dive down the rabbit hole and peel off the onion layers of self-discovery, and in this my own healing journey of wellness. I I come back around to aromatherapy and sound healing and movement, which is where I've come around to a time or two already before. And I'm so grateful for these healing modalities because, gosh, it's like life knows how to heal itself. It's as if our bodies know exactly what to do. And I'm being a little tongue in cheek there because indeed I do think that they absolutely do know what to do if we just get out of our own way and add the support. And part of that support is not engaging in those self-defeating loops, whether it's a bad habit of eating poorly or smoking or drinking too much or thinking negative self-defeating thoughts, which, as I mentioned, for me have been the biggest self-defeating factor. There are other self-defeating factors, but I could boil a lot of those back, to trace a lot of those back to this fundamental abusive storyteller aspect that I have in my own mind. And I think just to add a little caveat, I I'm trying to soften my story about even that abusive storyteller. So let me take a little roll back and see if I can come at that again with a kinder approach because really that part is a part of myself. It's probably a very childish, maybe even infant or pre-infant side of myself. And while it's not not qualified to drive the bus of this meat suit, so to speak, or it's not likely to get me to my goals, but it doesn't deserve shame or shunning. And that's been a big issue for me. And I share that because I think it's a big issue for many of us. Many times we feel shamed or shunned by the outside world, and then we turn that on ourselves and we begin to shun and shame and abandon and betray ourselves. And I've been through a lot of really painful waves that might make me tear up. A lot of waves of moving through that and forgiving myself for that and practicing doing better, showing up for myself. And one of the ways that I'm doing that is to cultivate an environment that supports more positive feelings, more more of a sense of love and security and like I care about myself. And one of the great ways to do that is with delightful fragrances. This neroli vanilla, for example, I already mentioned that vanilla was shown in 65% of people in this one study responded with a increase and more calm and less stressed feeling. And again, I don't know the details of the study, and I will say it's always important to um, be discerning and look into things and know that there's often details like that are used to make a point, as I am using it to make a point, but it's always important to investigate things for yourself. I'm looking at my notes over here, and there was another thing I forgot to mention, which was that even though a lot of the things about smell are associative, as in like a lot of the emotions that get triggered by smell, as I mentioned, wintergreen might trigger positive or negative emotions depending on your memories associated with it. And most of us have lots of memories associated, some more than others, some stronger than others with different smells. And also, there are chemicals in that olfactory ring, arena that I mentioned, more in the terpenes department, that can also stimulate other nerves, not just that olfactory nerve. In particular, the note that I jotted down is that there are some things like ammonia, and most of us know that smell of ammonia will like physically make you jerk your head back. There are some smells like that are almost unbearable for good reason because they actually are hurtful to your trigeminal nerve, to other parts of your body. They can burn your eyes, burn your nose, burn your skin. And so uh, there are some smells like that that trigger other nerves in the body. on top, so there's multiple things going on. And so those more caustic smells, more extreme smells, or the smells that cause a more extreme reaction in us, often can then also get associated, they get deeply wired into that associative memory part of our limbic system in the hippocampus. So it's all interconnected, it's all a little bit complicated, and also a rose is a rose, as they say. Most of us do find like most floral smells pleasant and most, you know, decaying smells unpleasant, for example. There are certainly some, um, as I was getting at, some physical components that are on top of or aside from the emotional memory limbic part of the equation. It's interesting to think about. I was just reflecting on there. A couple smells, Carmex came to mind, that get associated in our life with different, poignant parts, poignant memories. I smelled a little trace, a hint of some, I think it was a little leftover shampoo on something that had been packed in a travel bag recently that had a faint trace of a floral smell from some islands that I visited. Coming up on 6 years ago. It'll be like more than 5 years ago now. And still brought back a flood of memory just by that little hint of a fragrance. Isn't that amazing how smells can do that? There's some neat, interesting science out there with regards to our energetic frequency and how, like, rose oil is said to be one of the highest frequency oils. And when I say frequency, I think they're measuring hertz frequency. And I've tried to come to a better understanding of that, and I'm just going to say I don't understand it well enough to speak about it confidently at this point. So I'm going to just leave that there and say I find it intriguing. I hope to find time to dive into that more. But in any case, on some scales and some modes of thinking, and certainly in my own experience, there's a correlation, correlating aspect that seems true, that many floral oils have a very high vibrating frequency and can actually raise the frequency of your own body if you're inhaling that aroma. And as I mentioned, there's certainly been some studies where they can measure like brain activity. It's all about like what do we measure, right? And there's, we're always coming up with new ways to measure things and new things we want to measure. And in fact, that capacity to do that is just blooming exponentially right now. So it's sort of even hard to keep up with, but very, very exciting. I don't know if I fully expanded on a thought that I know I started to talk about the nuances of smells and the nuances of feelings. And I was trying to make a correlation that I don't think I quite brought together, which I don't even know if is really, certainly not a causation. And I don't even know if it's a correlation, but I just found it an interesting, maybe coincidence, which is that taste, which is associated with smell, to your taste buds are only distinguish salty, sour, sweet, bitter, and savory, like 5 different kinds of taste buds. And then all that other nuance that we call flavor really comes from the scent, from our olfactory nerves. And so I was thinking about how much richer a life with emotion, with feelings is, and how dead inside we start to feel when we don't have feelings, when we don't have experiences, when we can't share feelings with others. It's agonizing. It does not feel good. It actually does both feel like death, and it actually has been shown to kill us. It kills infants. It leads to older people dying younger. It's just not healthy for humans to not have feelings, to suppress them, or to be overwhelmed by them and having too many of them. So I need to make that caveat. It's not like Icarus flying too close to the sun or too close to the ocean. Both are no good. Both will get you dead. We want to live in the middle where we're not overwhelmed by too much emotion and we're not dead inside and devoid of emotion and having no meaning in our lives and no point, not able to make any decisions because nothing matters. That's what happens when we don't have enough feeling. So I urge you and I and us all to embrace more feelings and to see if we can find healthier ways of feeling our feelings. So instead of just reveling in those negative feelings, not that negative feelings don't have a time and place, they do, they're valid, but also we can become addicted to those patterns, to that victim mindset, and just waste our lives spinning around in that pit of despair, spiraling around that drain of shame and blame. Who that rhymes, so you know it's true. I vote no for all of that. I vote let's take a deep breath, smell the roses, smell the flowers, put a little perfume on, and greet the day with a better attitude, a little bit more smiling, a little bit better smell, light a little incense, go shake out the dusty mattress outside and let some sunshine in, let some petrichor in your nostrils, and just breathe it in and enjoy it. That's what I have to say about all of that. I am intrigued and enamored by the magic of fragrances, and I'm really excited to be getting back into perfumery and designing some new blends. I still have the old blends, the old tried and true blends like the Majestic Muse and these floral blends like the Norola Vanilla, which I have in various sizes and an assortment of containers over in the Sleeping Dragons store on Etsy right now and hopefully back on the website soon. And you can get to that by going to www.sleepingdragonsco.com. Should take you to the Etsy store. Um, yeah, keep an eye out for my book, The Shift. You can check out the description or somewhere around here and find a way to connect to me if you want to get on my emailing list, and I appreciate it if you do. I have been working on my website here and there, but it's still not done. I don't know if it'll ever be done, but hopefully soon it will at least be leveled up to a format where you might enjoy perusing it. And in the meantime, well, I just thank you for being you and let me be me. I thank you for stopping by and let me ramble a little bit about feelings and smells. And I'm trying to remember the joke that I was going to get into. And I thought to myself, oh, you don't need to write it down because it's so simple. You'll remember it. And, if I had learned anything ever about my ability to, remember a joke, it should be that I don't remember them very well. I don't remember if this is the one I told you. It's dumb enough. I remember it was going to be a dumb joke. Was it what tastes better than it smells? That would be a tongue. You're welcome. I don't know if that's the joke I started us off with or not. You can harass me in the comments if it's not, and I will try to do better next time. That's all I can do is keep trying to do better. I am excited, and I am sensual by design, as are you. I thank you for sharing this time with me, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Till next time, ciao for now. Peace.